There's a lot of woman power going on in this gospel of the woman at the well. And as I say that, I can almost hear the sigh begin. Because I know there seem to be so few places where women are front and center in the gospel that when in the lectionary we get a gospel with a significant woman's presence, we're often running into now familiar territory. And so I want to reassure you this morning, we are often running about women in the gospel. Because yes, women have been sidelined by the church for most of the church's history, sidelined by culture and empire that the church bought into, but not sidelined by Jesus. I think about this section of the story of the woman at the well. Jesus tells her they'll no longer be worshiping at the mountain or at the temple. And he says the hour is coming where the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman says to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he will proclaim all these things to us. And Jesus says to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. We know this about Jesus, right? We know that Jesus is the Messiah. And we know that Jesus wasn't one to sideline people. Jesus went to the outcasts and the lowly. Those are the ones he raises up. The 12 he called as his disciples are regular people, not the temple elite or the Roman elite. Jesus' parables and encounters involve people like the stranger, whom he shows is not a stranger, and the tax collector, and the poor in spirit, and the meek, and the sick, and the outcast, and the woman who's been divorced 5 times, the woman who also is the first person in the gospel to whom Jesus reveals that he is the Messiah. I am he. And she is the single person that he has the longest conversation with in the gospel. Now, is there a much lowlier person in the whole Samaritan city of Sychar than a woman who has been divorced 5 times and now lives with a man to have this amazing encounter with Jesus? Yet with our modern ears, we hear that story, and we hear Jesus shaming her by pointing out her history. And that is a common interpretation of this passage. And I'm reminded again how we put a tone to things that we read Jesus saying. We tend to interpret a stern tone in Jesus when he says, you are right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. We hear that as Jesus knocking her. But I read an article from Akinya Maggie this week who asks, what if Jesus is simply stating the truth of her situation? Because it's highly unlikely that she had the power to initiate 5 divorces from men. It's the men in this culture who had the power, and she would be out of luck without a male protector. So now she's with a man who is not her husband. And so, might Jesus simply have been stating it as a way of recognizing her? You are right in saying I have no husband, for you've had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. Honestly acknowledging her life situation. Maggie considers it as Jesus recognizing a structural vulnerability that women lived in, not personal sin. And this woman at the well, and don't we all wish that she had a name? She's not even used to being seen in this way. She is, after all, a mere woman in a low, even questionable position, so this conversation is really something else for her. But she's not cowed by Jesus. She is engaged Despite every taboo of race, religion, cleanliness rules, gender. Remember, she's a Samaritan, the Jews' enemies, considered religious heretics who worshiped in the wrong place and unclean from marrying with foreigners and a woman. But she goes toe to toe with them because being seen is so powerful. And in return, she truly sees Jesus, who is actually honoring her by asking her for something, even a mere drink of water. And she wants the spirit and truth that he offers. In her book, The Wisdom Jesus, Episcopal priest and author Cynthia Bourgeau writes, "When I listen closely to this fascinating story, the first thing I hear is a sort of mutual boldness. Clearly, Jesus sees something in this woman from the start. And far from being intimidated, she returns his serves beautifully. When he talks about water, she challenges him. But when he ups the ante and moves from literal water to living water, she goes right along with him. And when he says, 'With the water I give you, you will never thirst again,' she catches his meaning. She makes the leap right along with him. It's a fascinating exchange. There's a heart-to-heart connection and a heart-to-heart inner seeing. He sees who she is, and she sees who he is. And in the light of that mutual recognition, they keep on empowering each other and drawing each other along to greater self-disclosure. It's the greatest self-disclosure ever. I am he. And in a revelation that transcends stigmas of racism and sexism, Jesus gives an invitation for all to believe and to drink the living water. That this exchange takes place with a woman is significant for women's place in the church and in the world. And more so, it's about more than just women. It's about the place of the lowliest. Jesus makes his revelation of who he is and what he brings to the lowliest person in his powerful demonstration of the all-encompassing love of God's Spirit beyond the enclosure of mountain or temple. In this exchange with a Samaritan woman at the well, Jesus has expanded the boundaries of religious tradition and sectarianism, of interpersonal relationships, and of racial and gender stereotypes. How urgent is this message right now as we engage in unscrupulous war and division centered on religious disdain on both sides, an absolute disregard for the life of the lowly people, the ones who are injured and displaced and terrorized in leaders' insatiable drive for wealth and for power? Talk about structural vulnerability still being the basis of culture. Christians, we see that the very Son of God engaged the lowliest, and she responds as an evangelist of the good news, the best news ever. We are all equally beloved of God and equally to be nourished by the living water in spirit and in truth. Jesus straight up says, "Believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, because the Spirit and truth is not contained in boundaries." Isn't it astounding how we cling still to artificial divisions in light of the life and resurrection and revelation of Jesus Christ? So we weren't there, but maybe Jesus was not calling out and shaming the woman at the well. To quote Richard Rohr, we think fear and anger and divine intimidation, threat and punishment are going to lead people to love. We cannot lead people to the highest level of motivation by teaching them the lowest. God always and forever models the highest, and our task is merely to imitate God. Well, That sounds awfully lofty for me to do. But in today's gospel, imitating God, following the model of Jesus means encountering another person and engaging, which leads to relationship. And when that encounter includes Jesus, it leads to discipleship. In this season of Lent, take time to stop by the well of living water. Whatever that place is, where you have space and quiet to seek the holy, to encounter Jesus, and to make space for deeper relationship. Coming to know Jesus brings us closer always to who we really are, beloved and charged with mission. Because when we see that belovedness in ourselves, there is no denying it in any others. We come here together to drink of the living water, yearning to fill our spirits to overflowing, or even just to get a drop on the tip of our tongues if that's all we can muster. But our thirst is for the holy, and Jesus comes to quench that thirst for everyone. It's not just the woman at the well. Jesus knows your life story too, and he still comes to you, and he sends you forth.